So this is Module 12. This is the first question about agency costs. We have Tom Scott, who's an owner of a manufacturing company. He has two different kind of scenarios that he can work. One is 40 hours a week and one is 50 hours a week. And there's two potential company EBITs given his work. The company is currently worth 2.7. It needs 1.2 million cash equity. The rate is going to be 8% no matter what. Assume no corporate taxes. So he has two options. Let me do the setup first. Zoom in. If he works 40 hours, the EBIT is 435,000. If he works 50 hours, it is 530,000. Okay, so he has two options. One is to dilute his equity and only retain 69% of the shares. One other option is to use debt. So let's do the debt option first. So if he does debt, and I'm going to talk about the intuition behind this in a second. Let me add a little column here so it's prettier. What's the guy's name? Tom. Okay, so his debt is 1.2 million and his payment is going to be 8%. I believe that 96,000. Oh, because I did that wrong. Okay, so in any scenario, the payment on the debt, no matter how hard he works, he still has to pay 96,000 at the end of the term. If he has to pay 96,000 and he makes 435,000 using 40 hours a week, the leftover, the payment that Tom gets to keep, is 339,000. So he made 435, he had to pay his debt, and he got to keep 339. Doing the same thing here, he made 530,000. He gets to keep, he has to pay 96,000, and so therefore he gets to keep 435. All right, so if he gives up equity, he keeps 69% of the shares. So that means that he gets 69% of the cash flows at the end of the year. And by that logic, the shareholders get to keep that amount. Let me move this over. So this is the debt, and this is the payment. The payment is not specifically stipulated in the problem. I would hope that an exam would be more specific about what the actual payment is, but they just used 8%, or he just used 8% because that was the setup of the problem. So again, let me describe this to you. This is a very typical setup for agency problems. And the whole idea about agency problems is that you want the person to work hard. You don't want him to go golfing. You don't want him to go play with, his kids on the weekends. You want him to be at work all the time. And you can say like some moral stuff about how you want him to have time off, blah, blah, blah. But the point is, if he works more, in theory, he would be more productive. And so the model that is always used in corporate finance is we have some earnings that would be achieved with low and high levels of effort. And then we have some financing structure that incentivizes Tom to either work or not. So the two columns that we need to really care about are these two. And in this case, it's always better for us to have debt. He does better if he works a little bit in this column, and he does better if he works a little bit in the debt column as well. So he would never want to do equity. And just think about that intuitively. If you had your own company and you needed some cash for it, you would want to take on debt as opposed to equity, because every dollar of equity that you give up is a dollar that you don't get to keep at the end of the year. But for you, if you have debt, once you pay it off, then you're done with those people. And unless you get into financial distress, you still own your business and you can make the decisions. So there's like a lifestyle thing as well, that stops Tom from choosing equity over debt. Here, we're just looking at the math of this. If you play with these numbers a little bit, sometimes it can show that equity makes more sense in certain situations, depending on how you structure the cash flows, etc. Especially if he only has to give up, let's say, like, 5% of his shares. Equity could make more sense, and especially if there's some benefit to having additional equity holders. So a common one would be like, there's connections, like board connections, that would help us make more money. But anyway, in this situation, the way that we approached this problem was we wrote down the number of hours, the EBIT value here, associated with different outcomes. And then we figured out what the cash flows to Tom would be under the different scenarios. The debt one is based on he has to make a debt payment of 8%. The equity one is based on him keeping 69% of the dollars in the shares. And the answer here is that we want him to work hard. And if that's the case, he always does so in the in the debt scenario. He never works, he will work harder in the equity scenario. He still prefers the 365,000, but the 434 is a higher number, and so Tom is going to choose debt financing.